is Fernando.
And this is Emily.
And this is the second episode of the DAYLO podcast. I'm joined by Mr. Copeland, the head of libraries for Beaufort County, and Mrs. Alford, our librarian here at Battery Creek.
And today we are going to be talking about the recent book restriction ban things. I will jump us in. For some background, Beaufort County School Board met and decided to challenge these 9 books, and then they were for removal and restriction from school libraries. And the 9 books were sold by Patricia McCormick, The Art of Racing in the Rain by Garth Steen, The Bluest Eye, Toni Morrison, The Duff by Jody Keplinger, The Freedom Writer's Diary by Erin Gwill, and The Kite Runner by Callan Hostini, The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold, and 13 Reasons Why by Jay Asher. Lastly, Tilt by Ellen Hopkins. And with this, the board had voted 9-2 for some of the books to stay in libraries, but they all needed parental permission to check them out. So, first, can we get your opinion on it, Miss Alford?
Well, anytime there are barriers to books, I am bothered. I do think that it puts all the work on the parents as far as if they are okay with which most parents are, I believe, if they're okay with their student reading any book in the library, they then have to sign this permission slip so that their student can read a book. Whereas maybe it's only a couple parents, maybe not at every school, that want these restrictions. So you're putting the work on the majority of people because of maybe just 1 or 2 people. Also, I can see myself as a reader and as a teenager, I would not have asked my parents for them to fill out this form because I would not have wanted them to think that I'm trying to read something that some deem as pornography. So, because I cared so much about what my parents would think, even though the books technically are not porn, I would worry about what they would think, and I would not want them to ever question what I was up to. So it is bothersome as a librarian because we do want free, open access to all materials and not to have restraints.
Were you given any resources or toolkits on how to make those permission slips and put them out to parents?
Not yet. Here at Battery Creek, we don't have those books that were restricted, so it hasn't been an issue for me.
Mr. Copeland, is that occurring anywhere? Are there any toolkits being put out?
We were waiting on some guidance from the state in terms of what type of form we should use, since it was a state regulation that prompted all this. So we do have it in draft form right now at the district, and we're getting ready to put it through our what we call administrative regulations, kind of the rules that we follow here. So it will be available soon. But to date, I've asked any of the schools that have these books, if there's a student who wants to check them out, just let me know first so that we can make the appropriate contacts with parents, but that hasn't happened yet.
Could you see, I guess, this ruling in Beaufort County as far as instead of completely having a book banned, going the way of doing permission slips and whatnot, could you see that as being a precedent for other counties or the state level?
Well, I think what's tricky is that we've always kind of had this option for parents to opt their kids out of books. That's part of the registration form. When you register your child, you get a chance then to say, hey, I don't want my kid reading this certain author, this certain title, this certain series. I have a high schooler myself, and if I could go back, I haven't done it yet, but I keep threatening to ban Herman Melville. As Miss Alford knows, I can't stand that guy. the torture I went through when I was in high school having to read Herman Melville books, I would not want for my own child. I haven't filled that form out yet, but my point is the permission thing it's long-standing policy. Parents have always had that right. So this opt-in versus opt-out is new, and I think Ms. Alford is right. It kind of puts the work on the majority versus the minority, and in terms of it setting a precedent, I really don't. We hear from other counties, other districts in the state, they're not having the same issues we are here. So I don't see it becoming a precedent. If it did, that's a slippery slope that I wouldn't want to see our state as a whole go down.
So could this new South Carolina law affect, like, you know how the First Amendment is freedom of speech? Could this affect kind of like legally challenging on that kind of ground?
From what we hear every now and then that there is a lawsuit either in the works or, someone wants to. What's going to happen with it, I don't know. We hear things all the time. So far, they're just rumors. But yeah, it could happen.
Okay. These books have pornographic content or are labeled to have pornographic content, regardless of the context. So what is classified as pornographic content, Mr. Copeland?
In the South Carolina Code of Laws, there is a very strict definition of what is considered obscene or pornographic. This regulation ties that into what they consider. The people who wrote the legislation, I am bound within the confines of the law. If that's what the law says, I have to remove my own personal feelings about it. I think it was a Supreme Court justice who said in the late 60s, early 70s, I can't tell you what pornography is, but I know it when I see it. What constitutes my own personal definition is not books, what's in these books, but it's not about me. I have to do what the law says. And so far we have managed to do that in regards to this legislation.
Okay. So with that, I am understanding that it's on a strict definition and it is not able to be bended in any way.
Well, so even within the strict definition, there is a lot of room for interpretation. And I think that's sort of the main issue with laws like these. What you consider to be, going up to the line and going over the line of what the law says may be different from what I think. You may interpret this passage differently than how I interpret it. And that's especially when it's taken out of context and a work as a whole is not seen. A personal example of this, one of the books that was challenged, I served on the review committee for. So I read the book Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. It was challenged and it was returned to circulation 2023 or so. One of the passages that they seem to have an issue with, it was fairly explicit, but within the context of it was a character saying these sort of outrageous things to another character. They were best friends, and it was said in humor and in jest. It was sarcastic. Pulled out of context, sure, it looks a certain way. Put back into context, you can see that it's not written, where is author's purpose in this? It's not written to excite anyone. It's written to entertain. It was written to show this is dialogue between two characters who are having fun with each other. And they're teenagers, and teenagers talk that way. So the issue with certain laws like this that are written that way is they're open for interpretation, and who gets to decide how it gets interpreted. That's one of the issues we have.
Yeah. So, from my knowledge, context is not vital when you are creating these challenges, and you can pull like specific passages. So, with that, when books are pulled out of circulation, how difficult is it to get them back in circulation when they are not banned?
So, according to our own administrative regulation, which I mentioned earlier, when they are pulled out of circulation for review, they're reviewed, and then the board votes whether to return them or not. When they're returned, I'm guessing that's your question, like when they're returned to circulation. It's not difficult. We just get the copies that we know, we review them, and then we send them back to their home schools. And I think some of the issue, and I know this personally because I talked to someone at one of our high schools who said, I'm not for book banning, but some of these titles don't need to be in our elementary schools. And I said, well, that's where the misinformation is occurring, because they never were in our elementary schools. They wouldn't be in our elementary schools. I think we can all agree Colleen Hoover doesn't need to be read by a fourth grader. So when we return them to circulation, we just return them to the school where they previously were.
Okay. So it does, like, Lexile level does play into it. It's not just going willy-nilly. For anybody who didn't grasp that is, they are putting them back into the schools that they came from.
Yes, age appropriateness is, that's something librarians are trained to do.
As of current, so since some of these books are getting banned, and there's not regulation for what is, I guess, up or is allowed to be banned, has there been an update to the guidelines librarians have to follow when they're ordering new books for their catalog?
Yes, yes and no. We've always used our professional training and our common sense on what to bring into a library. So that hasn't gone out the window. We are able to ask the book provider, the vendor, to avoid anything that would be considered explicit. So again, there's that definition. What is your idea of explicit versus my idea of explicit? They might be different. But we have to operate within the confines of the law, and that's what we're doing even when we order books. If a book is known to have explicit passages, we have to avoid it.
Yeah, it's hard because as a librarian, you tend to want to operate full steam ahead the way you were, but knowing there are bans out there, you do find yourself censoring, or you have that battle of wanting to have the freedom to operate as the professional you've always been, but then there's a fear, and so then that can cause a librarian to censor books. So that's another factor that hasn't been thought about, at least, by the general public.
Is there any regulation that librarians or teachers in general are not allowed to share the list of banned books, or share that this book is banned and a reason behind it? Is there anything that could get a librarian in trouble for doing that?
Well, our district just has those 9 titles that we have removed, and we do make that information available. And then the state has also removed 21 titles, which they have made available, which then filters down. So the way the legislation is worded is, if any of these books are part of a school catalog or in a school classroom, then that's right now, that's against the law, what the law says. If a student happens to have their own personal copy, we can't control that, so we would not be bound by the law in that case. I don't know if that answers your question.
So teachers, or I guess librarians, speaking about those books or informing people about those books, they are not legally prohibited?
From speaking about the books?
Okay.
No.
Okay. So with that, what are some ways that librarians and teachers can advocate showing these books that are being banned that would still be in the legal bounds outside of like normal promotions?
It's tough. That's a good question. One of the books I felt strongest about was The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I thought that was a phenomenal book. Didn't think there was any justification for it being removed. But I'll be honest, I read it, I don't know, probably 15, 16 years ago. And the takeaway from it that I remember today in 2025 is how relatable some of the characters were, the development of those realistic characters, and the humor. I thought it was a really funny book. I think the author's funny. I don't remember the explicit passages. I couldn't tell you. But all I can do now in terms of talking about that book, I can tell you how great I think it was, and then I can say, hey, go find it at the public library, because we don't have it in our schools. What else we can do to talk about it? We can, on a larger scale, you can talk historically about censorship. This is not the first censorship movement that has occurred in America or other countries. Short of that,
Banned Book Week is next week.
Right.
And that's a big holiday for librarians. And I've always celebrated in some way, even when I was at a middle school. So yeah, that seems like the time to talk about it. I think students need to know what books are being censored or banned. So a lot of times, those are some really good books, maybe some of our best books. And I think it's important for them to understand the issues, of our reality.
One question I had was, what was your initial reaction to when all this started, considering you were, when this started, just a librarian yourself, and now you're kind of the one that has to enforce these rules that are being enacted?
That is a great question, and I do remember when this first started, my principal came and said, they're coming for librarians over these books. And she said they'll just have to lead us both off in handcuffs together. And I thought, wow, is it really coming to that? It's like I never went into this profession thinking I would end up in jail. The first thing I did was look through, so there were a list of 96 or 97 books. I looked through the catalog and saw how many we had, and saw that we had quite a few. But even before that happened, probably 3-4 years before that, we were told that district wanted to know about a certain book. It was called Denton Little's Death Date. And we were told to remove it from the shelves because it glorified, maybe. I don't know if it was glorified suicide or something like that, but we had a copy. And we were just told to remove it while it was under review. And my first question was, well, who's reviewing it? Whose idea? And it had gone home with a student at one of our Bluffton or Hilton Head schools. And a parent had issue with it. And I remember being just as irate as I can get. And by the way, this is me irate as well. But I was internally worked up over the idea that I was supposed to pull a book because someone there had an issue with it. So when the list of 96 books came out, that was again my first thought. But looking back through like a historical lens, like where we are and how we got to be here, I'm not sure what else we were supposed to do. You're trying to avoid a major blow up, and you are trying to review the books to do your due diligence. So the first thing I did was sign up to be part of the committee. So I served on seven review committees. Every time I was there, I saw another librarian, at least one, if not 5 or 6 others, doing the same thing. Teachers, administrators, everyone was in to make sure that we were doing this right and doing justice to these books and these concerns that the parents had. Because, you know, we serve all of our stakeholders, so we wanted to do what was fair to both sides. And it took a lot of effort, but I think we accomplished that. Did we make mistakes along the way? Of course, but I think other communities have used us as an example of how to review books that are challenged. And ultimately, I think the best thing that came out of it was a reasonable approach, because there were 96 books. There were committees who said 5 of those didn't belong in our schools. That means 91 they felt did belong. So it wasn't a blanket approach. It wasn't remove them all. It wasn't keep them all. It was very reasonable and even-handed.
Can you give us just a little bit more insight onto what it was like being in a review committee and what you guys did inside of those review committees?
Yeah, we met at the first meeting, I think, was at Bluffton Elementary, and then every meeting after that was at Okatee. So we were each asked to review. When you signed up, you didn't know what you were signing up for. You were signing up to review a book. You didn't know which book until they sent it out to you. We would get a copy of the book that we were to read. We'd have, I think, maybe 3 weeks or so to read it, and then we met with other members of the committee whom we did not know beforehand were going to be on that certain committee. And in that room at Okatee Elementary at 6 o'clock in the evening would be, I think we started out doing only a handful of books at a time, maybe 5. By the end, to speed up the process, we were doing 8 or 9. So if you think about 8 or 9 different titles and a committee of 6 to 7 people who've read each of those titles, each time we met, that's how full the room was. We had criteria that we had to go through. We had to say, was this book, the phrase I'll never forget, you had to check through the criteria, and it was the phrase, avoidance of pervasive vulgarity. So in my mind, that was asking, does the book not have explicit content? To me, that's pervasive vulgarity. It's 2 ways to say the same thing. It also asked, you know, what's the author's credibility? Is this an award-winning author? Is this someone who's well-known? We had to tie it to what's the book's educational significance. Are there standards that can be taught with this book? Are there things we can learn from this book by character development, plot? Whatever ELA standards you want to think of, does this book fit it? And that was the overwhelming majority of them. So when we had to meet, we had to decide as a committee, hey, how's your checklist look compared to mine? And there was a spot on the end of the tally sheet that said, what is your recommendation? Return it to circulation, return it only for 9th through 12th grade, return it 6th through 12th, because we didn't have any elementary books, or remove it from circulation. So I don't think I was on any of the titles that were removed. I do know there was one discussion I was there one night when they could not come to a consensus. There were 6 members of that committee. 3 thought they should remove it, 3 thought they should return it. It ended up in a stalemate, and what they had to do was get a completely different committee to come in and read that book again. So it ended up with 12 or 13 people reading it. I did serve. My takeaway was I got to read a lot of good books, but there was a clunker in there because you didn't get to choose what you got to read. And I read one. What was it? A Clockwork Princess or something like that.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. It's fantasy, and I'm not a fantasy reader, and it was god awful long. It was like 500 pages of this stuff, and again, I couldn't tell you the explicit content because I don't really remember. I just remember I had to get through it. Like I didn't. That was not pleasure reading for me. I did not enjoy it. I'm not sure that my former principal ended up being on that committee. He didn't enjoy it either. He said, I will never do this again if you give me another book like this. But again, we all voted to return it to circulation because that wasn't the overwhelming, there was no pervasive vulgarity. It was just boring in my mind.
So, pulling from that, it seems there was a very thorough process when you were reviewing these books, with a lot of questions where you had to find specific details. So I'm hoping that meant everyone who was on the review community did read the book. Are we still seeing this much effort being put forth with the newer books that are being challenged?
So the way the legislation is written, and the legislation came right after we finished our process. Turns out our process and the legislation pulled from the same longstanding South Carolina law that I referred to earlier. So they're not that different. I think what ended up happening was the way the legislation was written, it does not specifically say that you need to read the full book. So if someone looks at the excerpts and someone on a board, whether it's local or state, and says, oh, I'm not comfortable with this, they are fully within their rights and fully within the law. It doesn't say that you have to read the whole book. That was the expectation when we set up the committees, and so we did. And so I trudged through Clockwork Princess because I felt like I owed it to the other committee members. I owed it to the book. I owed it to, just because fantasy's not my thing doesn't mean it's not highly popular among readers. It is. I just recently, like my pleasure reading, I just bought a biography of Tsar Nicholas II, right? It's called The Last Tsar, about the Russian Romanov dynasty. If someone challenges that, I don't know who's going to get through it. Like, that's fun reading to me, but those fantasy readers are going to look at that and they're going to say, take it out because I don't want to read it. They're going to burn it. I get it, right? Like, everybody's different. So with respect to that, yeah, we tried to read the whole thing. We tried to read the whole book, and I know we did. But the law, the way it's written, doesn't say you have to do that.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that they had all these committees here in Beaufort County of educators, citizens, parents, grandparents who read all of these books and decided that most of them should return to the schools. And then the state Board of Education doesn't read the books, but takes excerpts from them and decides no school can have these books, including the Beaufort County schools. And it's just like, wow, to make that kind of decision to overrule the community seems very unfair.
For the initial review committee, like the ones you served on, was there a requirement as far as credentials or your professional background, I guess, for being able to serve on those committees? And after, with the new legislation and the new process, did those requirements change in any way?
So there are, that's a great question. I like the way you said it too. There are qualifications. The way we wrote our review committees when we started it had to be comprised of a teacher, a librarian, a parent, a community member, an administrator, district office staff, and I can't remember what the other one was, but it was 7 different
Very diverse.
roles. Yeah. Yeah, and some in education and some not. And I think the other one was a school improvement council member or PTO member. So even within a school system, a school itself, a school district, you have people of all different opinions and backgrounds. That's what makes us diverse. That's what makes us great. So all that was taken into account. The way the legislation is written, they gave us the option. You can still use that approach, but the actual vote on whether a book stays or goes lies with the local board. So our school district's board is the one making the decision. We can still, if there's a challenge today over a book that hasn't been challenged before, we will still make that committee made up of those same people, randomly selected. We'll have them read the book. We'll have them make a recommendation to the board to say, we think it needs to go back in circulation, it's fine, or we think it is in violation of the explicit content law and it needs to be pulled. The board still has to vote whether to agree with the committee or not, basically. They can read the book. They can not read the book. That's the way it's written. They just basically are voting to agree with the people who did read the book and make their recommendation or not.
So the review committee serve as just like advisors at this point now.
Essentially.
And the people on the school board, are those elected officials or?
Yes.
Okay.
With that, can they make suggestions of like quotes that would better the view of the book? Is that something that they can put in their suggestions?
That is a part of the form that we use. And I will say that the legislation, the parental uniform parent complaint form, which is what it's called, does require you to say that you have read the full book. This is people complaining about a book, that they've read it, and they are allowed to put as many excerpts as they want with specificity. What do you accurately object to? So there is a place on our form to say, these are the great parts of the book. And there's space for argument on each side. Yes.
Okay. Speaking of books, I did pull up the book that you mentioned earlier about Denton's Little Deathbed, and the very short summary that I am being given off of the website called Super Short Summary. It is, in a world where everyone's death date is predetermined, 17-year-old Denton Little wakes up 2 days before his scheduled death with a hangover in his bed with his best friend's sister, complicated by losing his virginity and cheating on his girlfriend. He uncovers mysterious clues involving his supposedly deceased mother, a strange man, and a potential government conspiracy, leading to startling revelations. Unexpected author and themes of death and terminal illness are present. Now, I know that, in my opinion, this does sound somewhat realistic to a teenager's life in general. Maybe not the death date, but kind of like a day-to-day in our modern world. And so it doesn't sound too inappropriate to me, but I could understand why.
Mm-hmm.
But in your professional opinion, was the ruling for it to be pulled just?
I did not like it at the time. Looking back, I still don't like it. It wasn't me ripping the hands out of ripping the book out of the hands of a kid who was reading it. That would have been dramatic. I mean, it was on the shelf. But that's the whole key with librarians. We don't push our own personal values and beliefs on students. We just provide access to a variety, whether things we agree with or not. And this took that away. I'm like you. I looked on the back and I thought, well, okay, if I'm a parent, maybe I'm not comfortable with my kid reading it, but that's a decision that I would make for my child and my child only. And that's not really what happened in that case. And this is like 2016, 2017. This is before all the book challenges, before the legislation. And I think whoever at district office made that decision to pull it until it could be reviewed, that was the wrong decision. But ultimately, I think it was probably 2 weeks later, I got told, oh, it's okay to put it back on the shelf. So whatever happened with it, I don't know. But I think there was just panic. I don't know what happened with the student and the parent in Bluffton. I don't remember.
Sounds like a pretty cool book to me. I feel like I'd read that.
Yeah, it does sound interesting. A lot of the books that I had mentioned earlier also share similar themes. Like The Lovely Bones. Well, I guess not super similar, but The Lovely Bones is about a young girl who got kidnapped and she was raped and murdered, in short. But the book does have a lot of valuable meaning, and it does have a lot of very vivid storytelling, which I know for myself, reading vivid storytelling does help improve my writing skills when I am doing essays or anything under the English subject and I am writing, because it makes it easier to pull from that.
Oh, yeah.
So with that kind of opinion sitting behind me, I don't believe that any of these books should have had that restriction where it makes it more difficult for kids to access them. Is that something that has been taken into consideration, how it has that kind of educational effect outside of the reading and vulgarity?
Again, they're just operating within what the law says. And I will say, I served on that committee for The Lovely Bones, and I thought it was a great book. It does have, she is the protagonist in the story is the victim of sexual assault, but even in the description of that, I don't remember it was very much implied. You had to really be an attentive reader and a mature reader to even understand what really was going on. And that the situation was very realistic. I mean, she was walking home after school and a neighbor who had always been kind of creepy got her attention, and these kind of things happen because bad people exist. The book, oh gosh, what was that book? It was a similar vein. I can't remember the name or the author. I read it. It was one of the ones that was challenged, and the woman in the story is essentially trafficked and held captive, and I remember being horrified. She was basically abducted at a park, and I thought, next time I go to a park, I'm going to be on the lookout for this, not that it would happen, but these things do happen. It's based in reality. And if anything, reading that book made me be more aware of something that just never would have crossed my mind otherwise. I don't think that's a bad thing.
I agree. I think that a lot of these books, in particular, have a lot of relation to what is going on in our current world. If not, they are very informative about what has happened in the past or what can happen in the future. And I think that they are quite vital for a lot of people to read. And as you said, mature readers, which is something that is, in my opinion, very important to think about. The Lovely Bones, like we were just describing, it was very implied. It wasn't outright talking about how the in-depth details on how
Yeah.
she was sexually assaulted and murdered, which are very deep topics. But it would take a lot of thought and pressure into really divulging yourself into those topics, especially in this book because it was so vague in the sense of those things. So with the other books as well, like 13 Reasons Why, it has very deep topics, but they are through the storytelling that they are introduced. So I'm not quite understanding of why they are taking a lot of realistic books out of schools. Is that something that is more pressed rather than truly fiction books? Or is it just kind of whatever comes through, they just...
I think they're just looking for instances of explicit content regardless of the genre. It just so happened, I guess, to have a couple of instances of it. And to be fair, those 9 books, I had to pull the circulation numbers on them. There were some that hadn't been read in a long time. 13 Reasons Why was not one of them. And that was in multiple schools. And any time a title is in multiple schools, that tells me kids everywhere are reading it. I know that Netflix had their adaptation of it, but no, I don't think that. I think the target is just. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I don't have an answer for why they choose realistic. And it is overwhelmingly realistic, but it does hit every genre. Personally or professionally, I can't tell you why. I don't know.
In my experience as a librarian, I found that students at every school I've been to have self-censored. They will return a book that they feel is too mature or the language they don't like. So I always find that interesting that students aren't going to read things that are what they feel inappropriate for them. They will say, no, this is too much. So it's interesting that are these parents who are against these books, do they not trust their own children to make those determinations that this book is too advanced for them?
I agree with you. And to your point, like when we were coming along, there was a series of books written by an author named V.C. Andrews, and it was called Flowers in the Attic, and then I forget what the other ones were called.
Yeah, there's quite a few.
But like, so I had an older sister, and she read this series, and she had all the books, and I remember like her and her friends talking about like, oh, it's so salacious or whatever. So I'm like, of course, a natural kid, like I want to find out what the big fuss is about, and I started reading, and I saw where it was going, and I was like, oh, I don't want to read this. And I never finished it. I have no idea what happens. Catcher in the Rye was widely challenged and banned in the 60s. And guess what happened? Everybody who came through the 60s read that book for the same thing. They want to know what the fuss was about. Some of them put it down and never read it again. Others thought it was great. But this is nothing new.
So with that opinion, knowing that everybody is going to want to see these salacious reasons and why they are banning these books and why everybody wants them gone, on a school setting, I can imagine from our school, there's not quite as many kids as we would love to know about these book bans. So they're not really looking for those reasons, but the kids who do know about the book bans and are informed themselves, I can imagine they're going out and reading those books to see why, whether it's in a school setting or not. So I'm not quite understanding their opinion on removing these books and making it so public, which is very important, but how they think that the publicity of them being removed is going to be enough for these children. I know myself, I have read a couple of these books, knowing before they were challenged, knowing that they had left an impact on me and how I conducted myself through my life. And so knowing that they were challenged, if I had seen now that they were challenged without reading them, I would go and read them and figure out why. So I'm having this kind of disconnect where either way, these kids are gonna pick up the book and read it, regardless if it's through a school library or a public library. So as like a parent, do you trust your kid enough to be able to be informed enough to have that kind of like, okay, I want to know why they're banning this, and then, oh, I don't like this book, I'm gonna put it down?
If I understood why parents make some of the decisions they do, and I'm one myself, and I don't always make the right decision for my kids, I think the issue is just one approach shouldn't fit all kids. I learned, I try to show by example with my kids. I don't tell them, I try not to tell them what to think for themselves. I tell them how I think and how I view things. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to do that way. My own dad, growing up, he had a lot of what I would say faults, and I'm sure my kids are going to say the same thing about me. But one thing he didn't do was tell me how to think. He trusted me to make my own decisions, and he treated me much the same way. He would have adult conversations with me about why he made the decisions that he made, whether it was who he voted for, what kind of things he read, how he dealt with people. And I didn't always agree at the time, but I do realize now he gave me the freedom to make my own decisions, make my own mistakes, live with them. That's really all librarians do with titles, is we provide access. I think the mistake is listing library books as instructional materials. Reading for pleasure is still a thing. None of us are forcing kids to read any of these books and write us a report on what the book says and what it means to you. So, do I think eventually they'll have to rethink that definition? Yes, but again, I know you're tired of me saying it, but we have to do what the law says.
I have a question. I want to go like quite a bit back, but I feel like a lot of the value in these books is what they teach you personally,
Mm-hmm.
and how to go about your day to day, or how to understand someone else's perspective.
Yeah.
And was that sort of like personal merit taken into account in the sort of rubric you described? Because I know you talked about like merit in terms of like
Mm-hmm.
ELA related skills,
Yeah.
but was the personal value taken into account?
Not as much as literary significance. And I think that's just because this, it is a school setting. We do have to figure out what we can learn, but we used to teach that empathy and understanding for others was not a bad thing. And there are a lot of these books that, as you said, can teach you that. It wasn't necessarily a book that was challenged, but I Am Malala, the autobiography, I read that, and it completely opened my eyes to, like, here's this kid who was roughly the same. I mean, she was a lot younger than me, but like her circumstances growing up in Pakistan were completely different from mine. And then she's shot in the head on a public bus by an adult. Like, I don't know that life. But the fact that she's still around and still able to process and forgive what happened and live within a society that's completely different from mine learning about someone different from me is a good thing. Helps me with understanding, and I think books will always have that value. Was it taken into account in the rubric? Probably not quite as much, but it all ties in with, the author's credibility and what are they trying to say? What's the educational significance? What are you learning from it? It's taken into account in a very generalized way.
I feel like a lot of people forget like how much school teaches you, like not directly, but I guess indirectly. I don't know who I'm quoting, but it's probably some wise guy. But he said most learning is done informally, and I think about that a lot. Like when I think back to kindergarten, how they always teach you how to be kind to people, and I'm like, man, where did that stop? You know, because I feel like, what good does it do to demote concepts like that?
I couldn't agree more. One of the best teachers I ever had wasn't even in school. It was on the television. It was a guy named Mr. Rogers. And one thing he used to say was if it's mentionable, it's manageable. So you can talk about difficult things. Yeah, there's a place for informal learning. I myself learn best. Like a teacher can go up in front of the board right now and directly try to teach me some concept. I may or may not get it, but if they model it, I learn by observation. I learn more from sitting in a room with people and observing than any other way. But, all learners are different. Some need to be told directly, and I respect that too.
I think that a lot of indirect learning can also be done through books. So with that, a lot of like how you were explaining, everybody learns differently. So there's going to be some kids who, unfortunately, will literally never pick up a book in their high school career unless they are forced to or told to for a class. So a lot of these book bannings and challengings and restrictions put these kids who are pushing forth that effort to pick up a book and read about someone else's experience to kind of like demotivate them to grab those books off the shelf. So it's very frustrating to see, like, I know that I read a lot of books and I've learned from a lot of books because a lot of the books that I read, they are not at all what I've gone through or seen in my own personal life.
Right.
So it's very eye-opening, and that's an experience that's going to be lost through all of these challenges and bannings because it's just going to demotivate kids from going to the school library and picking out a book, going to a public library and picking out a book, just making the effort to learn something new. And it's very frustrating as a student to see that happening.
And that's exactly what we don't want, because the library is for everyone. Whether you're going there to read Shakespeare, which I personally am not, or you're a reluctant reader, or you're finding what you need by graphic novels, you should be able to see yourself reflected in literature, and that's why we have so many different varieties. I don't ever want a potential reader to not go into the library because, well, I can't get any books there. I had a librarian explain it to me last year, and I honestly hadn't thought of it that way, but there was a school that was using book fines, for late books or books that weren't returned as punishment. If you've got over $10 in book fines or whatever, you don't get to enjoy library time. and this was a middle school. And that middle school librarian really pushed back against that and said, I don't ever want a kid to say, I can't go into the library because I owe money. And they're going to kick me out or they're not going to let me read the books. Like, never let that be a barrier to reading. So I get what you're saying. We fight those barriers all the time.
Yeah, that's interesting way of collecting book finds from little kids.
Yeah, we're addressing those kind of issues.
So I think that we have covered a lot of very important topics and have gained a lot of information myself. I've learned a lot about the specifics that the challenges are gone through, especially through the committees, because starting off this episode, I honestly did not know a single cent of what they did. So hopefully that helps educate whoever decides to come across this podcast and listen. We thank you very much for coming on today and for sharing your opinions and giving us some more in-depth legal professional opinions. I think that is going to be the end of today's episode.
Well, before we go, I got a question for each of y'all. What's your favorite book individually? Like, that you've ever read? What was the book that resonated the most with you? And please don't say Diary of a Wimpy Kid.
Has someone actually told you that?
Oh, yeah. I got that from multiple kids.
My
And I was
favorite
like,
book
oh,
was
geez.
Diary of a Wimpy Kid with the one that has the cheese touch. Specifically because I was bullied and told that I had the Emily touch.
I'll probably say The Fall by Albert Camus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've read like 3 or 4 of his books so far, and I'm a huge fan of all of them. But that was the first, and that's probably why it stuck with me the most. But I think the way, I don't know, I just like his writing a lot, and the way he's able to like portray human emotion, not just by having his character go through it. Like he can teach a lesson in the absolute like most mundane scenarios. So yeah.
It's amazing that you say that, because I need to come back for another episode where we just talk about Camus, because
Are you a big fan?
I love The Stranger. The Plague was the first one of
Okay.
his that I read.
Nice.
I identify with that whole
Favorite
genre.
book? Yeah, I want
basically.
to get more into it. I haven't read a book since probably our last DAYLO book, which needs to change. But next time I get a book, it'll probably be something else by him.
A book that has resonated with me the most that I've read, I did not find it through school, but I did find it on my own. It's called Suicide Notes by Tom Ford. I don't know his name. But it was about a boy somewhere around our age. He was a little younger than I am, probably 15, 14. It starts out, he was waking up in a psychiatric ward in a hospital because he had tried to take his own life. And it kind of went through the motions of what it's like to wake up in that kind of situation, and what he was struggling with internally. And in the book, it kind of evolved as he thought that people around him were crazy, and he started to learn more about what they were struggling with. And he started to learn more about himself and what he was struggling with. And I was able to relate very deeply to a lot of the topics in that book. And it pushed me to ask for help, which is something that I struggled with a lot prior. So it did push me to ask for help and to talk to the people around me before I got to a point where I was in an insalvageable situation. So just kind of reading what that experience was like, and learning that it's not just me feeling that kind of way, I was able to go from that and take change and make action. And it was kind of one of those books that like found me at the right point, rather than like I was searching for something like that. It just kind of came about.
Isn't that amazing when a book can do that to you? Like you would almost say it helped change your life in a way.
It definitely
Yeah.
changed my life. I honestly, I don't think I would have been in the position I am right now if I hadn't read that book and then saw that I needed to make that change.
That's beautiful, and like you should see yourself like with Camus, existentialism.
Yeah, right.
I read about that. I was like, God, this guy's just floating through life. Like that is me. That was me at that point in my life. Some would argue it still is. But that's beautiful. I love it. That's what books should do. So thank you for having me.
Of course. I'll have you anytime. Okay.
Until next time.
Until next time.